Phuoc Tuy Province, South Vietnam, September 1969. 5 Australian soldiers lie motionless in a shallow hide 10 meters off a jungle trail. They have not spoken in 6 days. They have not stood up. They have not cooked food because heat carries on the air. They eat cold rations from plastic. They urinate into bottles. They breathe in shallow, measured pools. And then the trail moves. A column of 30 North Vietnamese soldiers walks past in single file, weapons slung, talking quietly among themselves. The point man passes so close that the Australian patrol commander can see the stitching on his sandal. Nobody fires. Nobody breathes. The column moves on. The jungle goes silent again. The Australians do not move for another 4 hours. Across 5 years in Vietnam, the Australian Special Air Service Regiment would conduct more than 1,200 patrols, just like this one. They would inflict casualties at a ratio that defied belief, and the Viet Cong would give them a name whispered like a curse. Ma Rung, the jungle ghosts. But how did 580 Australians become the most feared men in Phuoc Tuy Province? And what did the jungle do to them in return? Captured Viet Cong documents carried a warning passed between units operating in Phuoc Tuy. Avoid the valleys where the Australian commandos move. They do not make sound. They cannot be seen. They do not miss. Entire VC patrols would alter their routes rather than cross terrain the SASR was known to be working. The fear was not propaganda. It was operational reality. The numbers behind the legend are almost difficult to accept. Across 5 years and over 1,200 patrols, the Australian SAS Regiment is credited with more than 500 enemy killed. Their own losses in direct combat across that same period, 1 man. But the kill ratios do not tell the truth of what these men endured. SASR patrols were not simply hunters, they were prey. 5-man teams operating 20 kilometers beyond friendly lines, with no artillery on call, no quick reaction force, no cavalry coming. Just radio static and the jungle. They lived this way for 7, 8, 9 days at a time, sleeping in shifts, never once standing upright. And the cost was not always counted in bodies. Some of these men carried the jungle home with them. It would take decades to find out how heavy it really was. The Australian SAS Regiment did not appear out of nowhere. It was forged. In 1957, the unit was raised as a single company. By 1964, it had grown into a full regiment based at Squadron, on the western edge of Australia. But what made the SASR was not the paperwork. It was the selection course. Held in the brutal heat of the Australian outback, candidates marched for days under crushing loads, on minimal water, with instructors who were looking for one thing: the moment a man broke. Most did. The ones who did not went on to jungle warfare training at Canungra in Queensland, where they learned to live, move, and kill in triple canopy. Then came Borneo. From 1965 to 1966, the SASR ran classified cross-border missions against Indonesian forces known as Claret operations. They were short, silent, and savage. Borneo taught the regiment 3 lessons it would never forget: patience, silence, lethality at intimate range. In April 1966, 3 Squadron deployed to South Vietnam under the 1st Australian Task Force. Their hunting ground would be Phuoc Tuy Province, a VC stronghold of rubber plantations, paddy, and the dark, long, high hills. An SASR patrol was almost always 5 men. A patrol commander, a second-in-command, a signaller, a medic, and a scout. Nobody wore rank insignia. Nobody carried jewelry, letters, or anything that could rattle, glint, or identify a body. Nobody wore deodorant or used scented soap because the enemy could smell it on the wind. The loadout was built for endurance and silence. SLR battle rifles, M16s, the suppressed Sterling submachine gun, claymores, a heavy radio, and enough water for 10 days. No hot food, no fires. Insertion was theatre. Helicopters would perform dummy landings at 3 or 4 false LZs across the AO to mask the real one. The team would slip out at the right one, and the jungle would close behind them. The doctrine was simple to state and almost impossible to live. See without being seen.
Then I withdrew the patrol back a bit because I knew I was very, very close to this suspected enemy bunker system. Moved the patrol back into the defoliated area and put them down behind some mounds. 4 of us there were, so we were each covering a different direction. The enemy reacted to that. We could see them moving around. They didn't come through the defoliated area because they probably didn't think we were there. I tried to get a message back through the 64 set, but we'd had the first rain about an hour before the contact, and my SIG said he couldn't get through, that the radio had been wet.
Movement was measured in meters per hour. Communication was by hand signal only. Waste was sealed into plastic and carried out, because leaving anything behind could compromise the patrol. Most missions were reconnaissance. Engagement was a last resort. But when contact came, it was savage, over in seconds, then a sprint to the rally point and a desperate call for extraction. In August 1966, SASR patrols moving through the rubber and scrub east of Nui Dat began reporting something unusual. Tracks, cooking sites, movement on a scale that did not match the local Viet Cong. The intelligence flowed back to the 1st Australian Task Force and shaped the preparation that, days later, would carry Delta Company through the Battle of Long Tan against a force 10 times their size. The SASR did not fight that battle. They had simply seen it coming. The ambush template was almost surgical. A patrol would identify a heavily used trail, position claymores in a tight kill zone, and wait. Sometimes for days. When the enemy entered the killing ground, the claymores fired first. Entire squads were eliminated before a single rifle came up. Engagements often lasted under 30 seconds.
We were really good at running away. Running away saved more lives in Vietnam of SAS than anything else, I think. And the way we would run away would be with so much fire down range and make so much noise that the enemy would wonder what they'd bumped. And when you had probably 3 SLRs, so firing on full automatic, so you've got 3 section-sized weapons, so the enemy's saying, we've bumped at least a platoon here, maybe more. That kept their head down for a bit while we disappeared. Most of our contacts were within 10 metres. We were shooting people just as far as that screen away. If we were in contact and it was a much bigger mob than we could handle, and we chose the runaway solution, we'd put an awful lot of fire downstream. We'd fire a movement, so some would fire, some would move, some would fire until we'd break contact, and then we'd tippy-toe away. Now, if we broke contact, then no need for a hot extraction. In fact, towards the last 6 months of the tour, if we broke contract, you stayed in. Put an ambush them somewhere else.
SASR also worked alongside the New Zealand SAS and, on occasion, US Studies and Observations Group teams. When extraction was impossible, helicopters lowered Maguire rigs and rope ladders through triple canopy, lifting men out hanging beneath the aircraft. sometimes under fire, sometimes for kilometers. By 1971, the math was staggering. Over 1,200 patrols, hundreds confirmed killed. Intelligence that shaped every major operation in Phuoc Tuy. The kill ratios tell one story. The men who lived them tell another. Across 5 years of operations, only one SASR soldier was killed in direct combat. But the regiment lost others, and the jungle did not care how it took them. On September 27, 1969, Trooper David Fisher was being extracted by rope from a compromised patrol position. His harness failed somewhere over the canopy. He fell into triple-layer jungle and was never recovered. He is still listed as missing in action. Others drowned during river crossings. Some were lost in helicopter accidents during insertion. The non-combat deaths were every bit as final as the ones counted on the contact reports. And then there was the cost that did not show up on any after-action report. Men who had spent 7, 8, 9 days in absolute silence, hyper-vigilant, listening for the snap of a twig that meant death, came home and could not sleep in a quiet house. They came home to a country that had turned against the war, that met returning soldiers with indifference and sometimes contempt. And because the work had been classified, many of them could not even tell their wives what they had done. They carried it alone, often for the rest of their lives. By October 1971, the Australian withdrawal from Vietnam was underway, and the SASR was among the last units to leave. They had arrived first in 1966, and they were leaving last, which felt right to the men who had spent 5 years watching the jungle for movement that should not have been there. Decades later, Vietnamese veterans interviewed by Australian historians would acknowledge what the captured documents had only hinted at. They had known about the Ma Rung. They had warned each other about the valleys where the silent men moved. The legend had been real on both sides of the wire. The doctrinal legacy ran deeper still. The patrol techniques forged in Borneo and perfected in Phuoc Tuy became the template for Australian special operations through East Timor, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Every 5-man recon team that has stepped off a helicopter since owes something to the men who lived in those hides for 9 days at a time. But there is a harder truth here. The SASR won nearly every patrol they fought. Tactically, they were close to perfect, and it changed nothing about the strategic outcome of the war. South Vietnam fell anyway. Phuoc Tuy fell anyway. The valleys the VC had once feared to enter are quiet farmland today, and there is no marker, no monument, no sign that 580 Australians once made that ground the most dangerous place in the country to walk. Somewhere in a quiet Australian suburb, a veteran sits in his garden in the evening. The neighbourhood is silent. His wife is inside. And he is still, after all these years, listening to the jungle. Some men come home from war. Some men bring the war home with them. The jungle ghosts of Phuoc Tuy did both. If this story stayed with you, there are hundreds more like it from the Vietnam War. Subscribe to Inside the Vietnam War so you don't miss the next one. We cover them here, one battle and one unit at a time.